Good morning there. Oh, Lord.
Morning.
Ooh, you too, huh? Okay. So we got here webinar number 40, Friday, December 28th, and it is a tad after 4 a.m.
You know, 40 is the new 30.
Oh, man, it's so good. So anyway.
40 is the new 30.
Should I shut him off, Pete?
I'm going to shut myself off. Don't you worry, none.
Okay. So anyway, we got the tax cure man here, and this is just going to lead on to some continuous webinars after this, isn't it, Pete?
That's what you tell me anyway.
That's what you told me last night. Okay. So here we go. All yours, Pete.
All right. All right. So this is we're going to be specifically looking at all the code that's handling this little section of the website where the cure lights up. As you hover over it, lights up. If you move the mouse out, the timer kicks back in. It starts doing it itself. You'll notice the text alternates as it lights up each one. And they also click through to a pop-up little prescription pad message box. And this is that new version 17 pop-up windows, or pop-up pages as they're called in WB. So we're going to kind of look at all that and touch on a few of the WB basics that it took to do all this. The cool thing to me about this is this is all 100% WX code. You know, before I learned about WINDEV, I actually had tried, I had done development in Cold Fusion. That was fun to say the least. And then I tried Alpha 5, and they don't have too bad of a product, but you best know JavaScript if you want to do anything. And try as I might, JavaScript is not the language for me. So I'm very excited about the fact that I can do all these type of features and functions without JavaScript, let me tell you. So let's get started. We got quite a bit we're going to go over this morning. The first thing is the cure header is actually a control template. And I did that because I've got it on several pages. So there is the control template that is every bit of the functionality that we just looked at is in this control template. And then I'm able to just drop that on to a few different pages that actually use it. That way, as I tweaked this code and did different things to it, I didn't have to go maintain it in several different pages. So control templates are very nice for that, that variability. There's two ways to create a control template. From your Project Explorer, you can do right-click on Template of Web Controls and do New Control Template. Either base it on an existing template or start out with a blank one. And from there, you're basically in the window editor just like you always have been when you're doing a page. And you just create your controls, and that becomes a template that you can then drop on. You have the code, everything that you would normally have for a page. So it's basically a self-contained sub-piece that can then be dropped on multiple pages. The other couple of ways you can create a control template is File, New, Page, Control Template. And then the coolest way of all is say, and this is exactly how I did this. I got all of this working up here, this login information, and then I clicked on those controls and right-clicked. It won't let me click on them because they're already part of a control template. And then when you right-click, you have the refactoring menu, and you can create a control template from your selection. So if you have a group of controls that lends itself to being a control template that you can then drop on multiple pages, you can get it all working on one page, select those controls, create a control template from them, and it will actually create the control template and then link these controls back to that control template. So from that point on, you maintain the control template, everything just works. A couple other things about control templates. Notice all the little yellow squares. That's how I know that everything in here is part of a control template. Now, if for some reason I wanted to do something special, like the login screen, for whatever reason I needed to do something special on this particular one, I can right click on that control, overload the control, and now I can get into all of the descriptions of that control and override any of the settings from the control template. And the rest of the control template still comes over. If I make changes there, they'll still make it over, but then I can override them on one particular page. So it makes it really nice for you to be able to, you know, it's an OOP style feature. Now we're looking at the code for that overrode button, and notice these execute ancestors. What they're about is, you see the code in gray here, that is the code that is actually underneath that template. I can't change that code other than going to the template, but I could put my code up here and it would execute, and then this code would execute. I can put my code down here and this would execute, and then my code would execute, or I could even remove the execute ancestor altogether, and then the code from the actual template would never execute. So even though it's a control template, you still have the ability to override and do quite a bit with it and extend it. Yes, sir.
Very, very nice. I notice you're not using Ajax. It's crossed out, so that's good.
Yeah, I am using Ajax in a couple other spots, and we'll see one Ajax call later on. If we have a little time, we'll actually talk about it. And since I don't actually want that to be overrode, I can go back into the overload properties and delete them. Now it turned back to a yellow box instead of a blue box, which means that it's not got any overload properties on it. It's coming straight from the control template. So that's the first thing to know, is that everything is in a control template. So another nice feature about putting them in a control template is I am able to test this thing completely standalone outside of the pages that I'm dropping it on. So, you know, I don't have to worry about any other code or logic of that page getting involved in my test. I'm able to unit test the control template with all of its code, its procedures, everything. So it's another way to break down into unit testing and do some of that unit testing that we're all doing these days, right, Arnold?
Yes, right, sir.
Arnold? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I knew you were testing.
I'm making it mandatory.
And
you're making it me man up?
Mandatory.
Right, so
unit tests are mandatory.
That's the guy that cuts my lawn, isn't it? All right. So
that's Manuel.
Next thing. Oh, different guy. Next thing is, when we're on this page and the mouse is not up in that area, the cursor rotates through. And as a few have mentioned, it rotates through at a frustrating pace that's just a little faster than you can read. And we did that on purpose as one of those little things to make you want to explore it. It's you know, one of those evil, deceptive marketing gimmicks, but that is being done by a timer. Timers are a way to execute a procedure at a set interval. And on the onload event of this control, and again, this fires just like the onload of the page does. It'll get incorporated into the onload of whatever page it's dropped on. All we do is say we want a timer. This is the procedure we want to call, and this is how often we want to call it, and that's in hundredths of a second. So every 1.5 seconds, letter time is going to fire. The timer statement returns a unique number. It assigns every timer you start a number. So we're recording that number so that we can use that later on to turn the timer off when we need to.
Is that almost like a thread number, like a timer?
It's actually
because you can have multiple timers or something.
Yes, you can have multiple timers. There's actually 2 different types of timers in WD. There is timer, which is a WINDEV timer, which is only running within the thread of your application. And there's also timer sys, which is a true operating system timer that uses the operating system to manage its thread. Naturally, because this is running in browser code, this timer is executing inside the user's browser. So this is managed by the actual browser, not the operating system. We don't have access to the operating system of the remote visitor. All we have is we are self-contained within the browser that they're running, even if it's the crappy IE6 browser. But yeah, wow. Basically it is a thread. We don't have to do any thread management and thread safe and all that type of thing. All we do is say, hey, fire this procedure every 1.5 seconds and let's go. That's the whole idea behind WX, is we don't have to worry about all of that type of stuff. Like I said, one of the things that you notice on the cure when it's running is that's automatically going across there, and it's going a little faster than what you can read it. And the reason we did that is we want people that have that urge to investigate it. And the natural way that you investigate things these days is you touch them with a mouse. The Google Doodle definitely has taught us that. That's how I spend the beginning of every morning, is finding out what the Google Doodle of the day is. And you'll notice once you move the mouse into that region, the timer is no longer running. I can leave this on the U as long as I want, and it does not switch. That's because I have stopped that timer and have now put myself into a manual mode so that the user can explore at their own pace. And how we are doing that is when they go into that region, this call gets executed and the end timer event fires. And notice the timer number that we captured up above. So whatever that timer is, I'm stopping it. So the timer statement, when it started the timer, assigned that number. Now that I'm ready to stop the timer, all I do is use end timer with that number that was assigned to the timer, and now the timer stopped, the procedure will no longer fire. So that's the basics of timers, and we'll see all the code that runs all of that as we move through this thing. So now let's talk about browser procedures. When you start working with WebDev, one of the things that you quickly learn and begin to wrestle with is you now have two completely different sections of code. In Windows, we had procedures, we had variables, life was good. When we move to the web, we have to make a decision. Does our code execute on the server or does it execute on the browser? And the reason for that is it all goes to the entire web browser paradigm. Stuff that executes on the browser is actually being executed by IE, Chrome, Safari, Firefox. It is sandboxed within that browser, and it doesn't know anything about what's happening on the server side. It is completely running over on the user's computer. The server doesn't know anything about it. It doesn't know anything about the server. The only way the two know anything about each other is AJAX, and that's a conversation for down the road. But when you start out, basically the way to think about it is the browser's code is just like it sounds. It's over there on the browser. It can't see, touch, do anything to the server. Server code is back on your side, and it can't see, touch, do anything over there to the browser. So there's like a firewall between the two, and that causes a lot of frustration when you first start working with it until you learn the idiosyncrasies back and forth. And we'll talk about a couple of those as we move on here. Like the way I declared those variables was very important, and we'll talk about that a little later on. There are basically three stored browser procedures that run the cure. Letter time, that was the one that we saw getting fired by the timer. And it's pretty simple. All it does is say, hey, you know, what letter are we on? And it increments it. So, you know, I have 4 letters, C-U-R-E. Every time, if you were on U, I now move you to R, then the E, back to C. So that's all this code is doing here. And then there are 2 other procedures, letter out and letter over. Letter out turns it back to the normal text and the unlit big letter. The letter over is the hover effect that lights up the big letter with the orange and displays the alternate text. And there's also a variable that we're passing into those procedures to let it know whether we're calling it from the timer or not. And we'll look at the reason for that as we go through this. So there's our browser procedures right here. Letter over, letter out, and letter time. And there's really not a lot of difference between declaring these things, except when you create a procedure, unlike WD, you know, when you right click, you actually choose local procedure. That is a server procedure. Local browser procedure is a local procedure for the browser. And it's the same thing with global procedures. They work the exact same way. You actually have browser procedures, server procedure collections. And another thing that may help you as you try to get your head around this, especially if you're new to web development, not everything is supported on the browser. There's certain features, functions that aren't supported on the browser. You can't deal with global variables declared on the server. You can't do file commands. Basically, you can't do anything that gets back, tries to talk to the server. One of the ways that may help you think about that and understand that a little better, anything that is in this browser code, again, it's running in Chrome or IE, Safari. Those browsers don't know anything about WX code, do they? They've never seen W language. They don't support W language. What PCSoft has done is every language function of WX that they support in the browser code gets translated into JavaScript, and it's actually JavaScript that's running on the back side. You know, that's the only thing that can run on the browsers is JavaScript. So that's the reason some functions are or are not supported. The one that's the toughest to me, and I feel like my arm has been cut off, is indirection is not supported in browser code. And that is keeping us from being able to extend and do a lot of the really fancy stuff that we've learned how to do in WD. We can do it on the server. We can't do it on the browser because we don't have indirection. That's not necessarily PCSoft's fault. You know, the indirection is not really a concept supported by JavaScript. So that's the basics of browser procedures, and we'll actually look at this code as we start working through this. All right, so the alternating text and the color. As we saw on the cure, as it moves, the text changes and the big letter lights up. That is all done programmatically by those two procedures that we just talked about. Letter over lights up the letter. Remember the parameter that's getting called to tell it whether it's coming from the timer or not. The reason for that is, remember, if the user is exploring manually, I want to shut that timer off. I don't want them to be trying to look at a particular letter and then the timer jump to another letter. So if I'm saying that they are on a letter and they're doing it themselves, from timer will be false, and I'll fall into this little code to actually shut the timer off. And I also turn off a letter if the last letter was any letter other than the current letter. And then the actual code that is doing the switching of the text and the coloring of the letters is right here. All we do is say, okay, which letter are we on? You know, what letter do you want me to brighten up? You know, that's passed in as 1 through 4. All we do is change. There are 3 statics that make this thing up: the big letter, the paragraph, and the heading. So this is the static for the paragraph, and all we're doing is changing its value. And we're using that handy square bracket so that, you know, it's easier to format the text exactly like I want, instead of, otherwise I'd have to actually do this with carriage returns, and it'd be a big, ugly, nasty looking string statement. The next thing we do is we turn on the orange of the big letter. Now I could have done that right here by doing orange. Okay, I'm not, maybe the, okay. Apparently, I've never tried that before. Apparently the equates aren't available in browser code. So we couldn't have done that, but we could have hard-coded the color, definitely. But instead, I'm using the color palette statement. And the color palette statement, what it does is use one of the assigned colors to your palette. And let's talk about palettes and skins for a minute. If we go into project description, when we create our project, one of the things that asks us is what skin do we want to use? And they give us quite a few different ones. And also what palette. The skin controls things like the background graphics of buttons, different things like that. And then the palette actually does exactly what it says it does. It assigns the color scheme of that skin. So you can mix and match the two, which gives you quite a variation. And it's actually very easy to do. You know, here is the standard TaxCure website. Now all I have to do is come into my project description, go to my skin, and if I were to change it to cherry dark, click OK. And just like that,
The horror.
you see that. Yeah. I'm not saying that would be a good color scheme, but the notice that the color of the big letters changed. Everything has changed, and that is all those color palette settings. So, had I
Control Z.
Yeah. Now, notice these two didn't change. And the reason for that is we actually did a background graphic for those because we wanted a little different shading effect. We have a little darker shading to give a 3D to our headings. Because we did that as a graphic, we're now hindered a little. It doesn't automatically change. Because we used the standard style gradient for the middle box, it did change to the new color scheme automatically. So that's one thing to be very conscious of. Everything that you set with your styles and stuff, as much as you can stay using the palette instead of choosing a specific color, means that later on when you get a hold of a site that looks like this, you can say, I can fix that. You just go change the palette. I don't know that you can Control Z that. I don't think you can, Andy. I think you actually have to go all the way back over here and change it back.
That's punishment for what you did.
Yeah. Oh, and that's not the ugliest one. There are some uglier than that one.
Those are the times I'm glad I'm colorblind.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey Pete, could you have just escape? Could you have just canceled out of that session and then come back to? If you forgot what you said.
I'm not sure. I don't think so, because at that point it has changed every page. So I think it's actually changing.
It rippled
pages.
through, huh?
Right. Yeah. It changed everything. I'd have to experiment with that a little bit to know for sure. Now, like I said, when you set up your styles and stuff, you want to use those palettes, and this is where you do that. Notice this says link 1, and I sure wish they'd give us a little more room there. There we go. That's link 1, text 1. This section up here is your palette. And as you see, there is a lot to your palette. Link 1, there's 3 different tabs: text, background, border. Within those, there are several categories. and then there are 3 columns of colors within that. So this is using link 1, text 1. So it's using text is the tab, link 1 is the category, column 1. So that is the color that it's using. Now, if we go back over to my code, you'll see that I am using color palette, color border, note warning 2. And these things don't translate perfectly, and it's another one of those, I suspect, French English translations where they didn't do a perfect job. But if we come over here and we look, it was border note column 2, and there's that orange color. So that is where that color is getting its assignment from. So if I come in here and click on that edit, I can actually make a copy of that palette and start tweaking it for my own palette. And as you see, we have done a custom palette for PC Reminder, and it is in here, so I can use that palette again and again. So if later on we decide that there's something about our palette we don't like, we don't like this color of blue for our headers, we can edit that palette, and that will ripple through the entire site as long as we have stayed in the guideline of always using a palette color instead of hard coding a color. And that's what the color palette statement is all about, is tab, category, column. All right, so there's again, you know, a lot of what we're doing here is some of the basics and primary type things that you'll start dealing with as you move into WB, that you want to start making those decisions up front so that everything in your project can later on be changed without doing a lot of work. You know, we actually, when we first wrote PC Reminder in Cold Fusion, we didn't do things like that. And then when we started private labeling, it was a nightmare because we had to go back and change every page to private label it until we went back and rewrote it in a generic fashion. So doing those things up front, you know, I want to be ready the next time somebody comes to me with a big check and says, I want to private label your site and I want it to be this color scheme. So the next thing is the actual effect of, as we move the mouse into these regions, the text changes. And I have forgotten to change my cursor. I got to do that again. The text changes, we get the hover effect. Now this is the one that I struggled with the longest. And a lot of you saw the first version of this. And in the first version, only within this paragraph of text did I have that actually trigger the hover effect. And the reason why is I was trying to figure out different ways of doing this. Not all controls have the correct embeds. What I am using are these 3 embeds. On click, picks up the click, pops up the prescription pad. Mouse out is when the mouse moves off of an area. We fire the letter out to turn that letter off and turn the timer back on. Letter over is the hover effect. So when the mouse hovers over an area, it fires this event. Not all controls have these processes. Statics do not have that process, so you can't affect a static with hover over effects. When I first did this, I had them as links. I had this paragraph as a link which had those three processes. The problem was, because I was doing it on this, only on the link of this, moving your mouse up here, over here, did not have the same effect. And that just made it not quite as user-friendly. You know, it's very obvious what's happening now. Before, it wasn't as obvious because you had to be in just the right area to affect the change. So then my next step was, okay, well, I'll make the CURE also be links, because in our testing we found that human nature, when you push the mouse up there, you want to hover over the big letters. It's just one of those human nature things. So when I turned those into links so that I could have those events and fire off the hover effects and so forth, the next challenge I ran into was links. You don't have the color property. So now I could fire my event, but I couldn't execute this to turn the back of that C into orange. Now I could have done that with the style hover settings of the link, but there's no way to do that programmatically when you're not hovering over the control. So at that point, links were out. I pulled back on my Clarion knowledge. You know, there's still a little of it left. Clarion had regions, which were basically boxes you drew on the screen that said everything within this region is the mouse events are captured for this region. I searched around. I have not found that concept in the WX products. They don't really have a region. But playing around, I've tried a couple of different things, and I think I've duplicated the region effect fairly well. I tried buttons. The problem with buttons, I never could get my statics and my buttons to where I could have a button that didn't look like anything. It was just a region and the text still show through properly. I struggled back and forth, never got that to work. What I wound up doing is, and as you see, there is a box over those three statics. That box is actually an image control with a 1x1 transparent pixel image in it. And that is important for a couple of reasons. First, I should mention the one that I would have thought would have worked and I tried first were cells. Cells seem like they would be regions. The problem is cells don't have those processes for hover over and click. So I think that if they were to add those to cells, that would be the logical choice in all this. But right now we don't have that, so I wound up using images. I tried it at first doing an image without assigning it any actual image file. The problem there were the browsers would show the missing image little emblem on the page, which obviously wasn't something I wanted. So I said, okay, you know, I pulled out my 1999 web designer handbook and remembered I have this little 1x1 transparent pixel that we used to use for all of our spacing issues back in the horrible days of IE6. Well, it came in handy for this. I just throw that in there. So now I've got a transparent image. it's 1 pixel, I won't get that missing link display. Well, when I ran the page, it still didn't perform right. And the next trick that I figured out was I have to stretch it. Even if you assign the size over here so that it's that full box, if your image size is smaller than that full size and you're not stretching the image, the mouse events and so forth aren't captured over in that bigger section. So you have to actually stretch the image.
Damn, Pete, you made your own region, didn't you?
That's exactly what it is. This is a region control, and you know, it comes in handy for a lot of things where you want a mouse effect to be not for a particular control, but for an entire region. I was really surprised that they didn't already have that control. So the next thing we want to talk about is, we'll notice now I have this image and then I have the 3 statics sitting on top of that image. There are a few tricks to accomplish that. And let me jump over to my experimental page and we can talk about those. Say we have, in fact, there's my hidden image right there. Now I want to put this static over the top of that. Notice how that box turns pink and I get the little, you know, do not go here. If I try to drop that, nothing happened. The reason for that is it's telling me those 2 controls cannot be overlaid on top of each other. Now I could use my mouse and move it up in there, and notice how it starts turning pink when it gets up into the box. Those pink areas are telling me that I've got some controls overlaid and it's going to cause me trouble on browsers. And what it's going to do on the browser is dependent on, you know, the phase of the moon, what browser, what version. I have seen it do everything from display perfectly to spreading the controls apart to, you know, opening a black hole and sucking the person into oblivion. And that's frowned upon, so, you know, we try not to do that very often. So how do you overlay the controls? You come into the description, and this little checkbox right here, this control can be overlaid. I like to call that the make it work control, because that it seems like I am constantly turning that on. And what that is doing is it's telling WebDev that you want this control's position to be controlled via CCS free statements instead of absolute positioning or relative positioning to other controls. So now it actually sets its position and it will overlay it using CSS commands. So if you got something that looks weird, when we started testing our site in other browsers, we were having a lot of oddities with these paragraphs in boxes and stuff. And invariably when we would look, it was where I had not checked one of those overlay properties. Like I said, I kind of call it my make it work checkbox. I'm not sure that there's any overhead or not, you know, what the downside of having that on every control is or isn't, but I have it on almost every control, especially on these type of screens. Now, when you get into standard layout type screens where you're not trying to do marketing copy, you probably don't need it as much, but when you're trying to do this type of marketing copy, you're doing a lot of overlay type effects. So that's just another one of those basic WinDev things or WebDev things to keep in mind, because at some point you're going to need it. All right, so let's actually take a look at the code of that region now. If we click on that control, and because it's over the top of the other controls, the first click gets us there. If we want to actually work on the static, we got to do a second click. So we click and we go to the code. Let me cancel out of there so that we only see that code. There we go. There's our 3 pieces of code. We'll talk about the pop-up shortly. Mouse out is calling that letter out procedure. Mouse over is calling the letter over procedure. And this time we're calling them with the false parameter, saying we're not coming from a timer. These are manual events fired when the user actually moves their mouse into those regions. We're letting those procedures know that so that the code can perform differently. And then this is the actual letter number. We're looking at C, it's a 1. The U is 2, on down the line. So let's take a look at our procedures again. Our letter over procedure, we're now calling it, and we said the from timer was false. So again, that's because that from timer is false, we're issuing the end timer statement. We keep track of what the last letter was so that we can turn it off. If we didn't do that, when you manually hovered into an area, all you would do is light up the new letter. Well, obviously we don't want every letter to get lit up. We only want one letter lit up at a time. So we have to keep track of what letter is currently lit up so that we can turn it off. So that's what this statement is doing, is turning off the last letter. And it's saying, okay, now the last letter is the letter I'm getting ready to light up. And we've already talked about what this code is doing. Exact same thing on the letter out. When the user moves their mouse out of the region, again, we're not coming from the timer, so this statement fires. And that statement should look pretty familiar. It's the exact same statement as we're issuing on load. It's saying, okay, the user has moved out of the region, start the timer back up. 1.5 seconds from now, it's going to automatically start rotating through the letters again. And then this code is doing just the opposite of the other. It's putting the regular text back, and again, it's using the color palette, and this time it's using color text link 1, column 3 to get the color of those letters.
Hey Pete.
Yep.
On those static letter text you have there, the static C U. If you were going to put that into a database, would you create a field that had that like that with the brackets as in a memo, or I mean, how could you verbalize that at all?
Let me show you.
So you wouldn't have to recompile this every time.
I actually have since created a content table for, and I haven't put those in it. I actually thought about that last night, that I probably ought to move them over there. Where I'm using it is stuff that's a little further, a little bigger, like our privacy policy. There's our terms and conditions. As you see, it's all pure HTML code. What I'm storing into the control. And then if we come over to the site and we create an account and we click on the privacy policy, that is that content being displayed right there.
Or your own content management system.
This is an HTML, or instead of a static, I'm using an HTML static. And an HTML static will display the actual, like this is a heading 1, so it's using heading 1 there.
Yeah, that's the beauty of that, because you can then start doing your different bolding and italics or whatever you want to.
And when we get into the pop-up, I'm actually using that again, and we'll take another look at it over there. So yeah, that's exactly how I would, in a content management system, if I move these over here, they would just be characters, hard returns, because this is a static, not a HTML static. Hard returns take care of it. We don't have to do BRs or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk. We briefly talked about browser variables. Let's talk about them a little bit more. The onload up here, I declared those variables, and then we used them throughout our browser code. And when I was writing this up yesterday and the day before, when I started on this, I was actually not using variables like this. And this is one of the reasons I love doing webinars and working on the blog articles, and I encourage you guys. Some of you think, well, I'm not far enough along to be doing these webinars, and Arnold keeps after you about, yes, you are. Everyone can share and give tips. It really helps your development as well. And as I was preparing for this webinar, I pulled up that help screen again on the differences between browser code and variable and server code, read it 3 or 4 times, and got a little better understanding about variables. Here's where I made my mistake the first time through this. I did this because this is what I always do.
Oh, server side, huh?
Yes. Now that all looks like it's going to work, doesn't it? You don't see any errors there, do you? But because these are declared on the server side, they're not going to communicate and carry over correctly with the browser. The browser can see them, but it can't change them. So what happens is when we get down into some of this other code, see the little green underline there? I kind of wish it were a red underline. And if we hover over that, it says modifications of global variable last letter will not be processed on the server.
Oh yeah, that should be red, huh?
Yeah, because it's a server variable, it's not going to be able to affect a change on it. And it's one of those things that's subtle enough that sometimes everything seems like it's working, but you're getting some just odd behavior. I struggled with that whole server browser variable quite a bit. What I had started doing was using edit controls. And I would actually drop an edit control, hide it, and use that as a variable. And there's still instances where you may need to use that trick. Hidden edit controls, hidden buttons are going to be 2 of your best friends in web development. For instance, over here, these buttons for privacy policies, those are hidden buttons that we call from our code. And the reason we're doing that is to bridge that gap between server code and browser code. We can't make server calls from browser. We can't make browser calls from server. So by pressing the button and the button makes the call to the server, we can do those things back and forth. So we won't get into it a lot today,
I get it.
but just keep in your back of your mind, and we'll do. I think Glenn has done a couple of demonstrations of these techniques. You know, I'm by no means original here. You know, I stole a lot of this stuff from Glenn for sure. But keep in the back of your mind those two tools in your toolbox: hidden edit controls, hidden buttons. Those two things are going to be your friend as you start trying to do some of this communication between browser and server. Okay, so we put it off long enough and we have half an hour left. So do we want to see how that's done, or you guys don't really care about that, do you?
Well, let's see. Come on.
Huh?
Hit the chat, guys.
You
Huh?
don't really. Yeah,
Let Pete know that you're still here.
Okay, that is the super duper new pop-up pages, which I hate to do this because you know how Andy is. He'll get a big head, but I didn't know they existed. Andy was showing me one of his projects. We were looking at some stuff, and I said, "What the hell is that?" He said, "Well, that's the pop-up page." I said, "What the hell is a pop-up page?" So then I went back and started reading and looking at them and said, "Oh, these are kind of cool." Before 17, we had cells, and what you would do is on your page, if you had something that you wanted to pop up in like a dialogue, you would create a cell over here that would be your dialogue, and then that cell would be hidden, and then only via a pop-up cell dialog command would it display. It worked, but it was kind of a pain. I had a lot of trouble with my browser pages. Even though that cell was hidden, I was still struggling with it affecting the spacing, the sizing of my pages. In other words, I would try to center my page, and because of that hidden cell over there, my page would be off-centered. Or I'd have a scroll bar telling the user that they needed to scroll to see something over to the right, and they could scroll over there and it was nothing but blank area. I had a lot of those type of things. It was just, it was a good start, but not perfect. Pop-up pages are way better. Pop-up pages are the exact same concept, but they've now broken them into their own editor, and they do all that management of hiding the cell and all of that type of thing. And they're pretty easy to create. You see, if you have a pop-up page defined on a page, you have this little button up here for your pop-up pages. You can also get to page pop-up and get a list of your pop-ups and go in to edit one of them. They're basically mini pages within your page. Now, the thing to understand about them is they do actually, they are part of your page. They are not a separate page, a separate procedure, and that you have to get your head around that, because the first mistake that most folks make when they start using these things is they think that when they issue the command display pop-up, that it's initializing those controls and displaying that pop-up. That is not the case. When your page is open, those controls are initialized because they are part of your page. They're just hidden.
Hey,
so
Pete.
Everything is initialized when it's first opened. Yes.
Pete, is that like planes in WD? Those pages are just
Similar.
like planes.
Similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are similar. They're just hidden controls is what they actually are. They're floating hidden controls that when you issue the pop-up display command, they're unhidden and moved into the center of your screen. But just like any other hidden control that you put on a screen, they are initialized when that page is first initialized. So the reason that I'm harping on that is, generally speaking, for the most part, what we're using pop-ups for, we're doing stuff that we want them to be affected by changes that the visitor made to the screen or something. And because those controls were already initialized when the page was opened, it's not going to have the values in it that we want in there when we open up that pop-up. So generally speaking, you need to set those controls that are inside your pop-up right before you issue your pop-up display command so that you get the values and so forth that you want in there. If you were to do a file to page command at the beginning of your code and then throughout your page you've affected that, and then you pop up your pop-up page and it's linked to a file variable, it's going to have the original variable, not the variable from that you've affected somewhere else in your code, because you haven't done another file to page command. So those are the type of things I'm talking about. And it's not tough into the world. It's just another one of those things that you need to remember. If you don't, it's going to get you at some point. So that's the basics of pop-ups. Now, the coolest thing about pop-ups is they are an integral part of your page. They move along with your page. The worst thing about pop-ups, they're an integral part of your page. They move along with your page. That was my first issue with them when Andy showed them to me. And I said, well, yeah, that's cool. And Andy's using them in one of his projects for a lot of his smaller forms and so forth. My concern was, well, they're not really reusable. You have to declare that as part of your page. So now if I decide that I need that form on another page, well, I have to recreate that pop-up over on that other page, because that pop-up is actually declared as part of your page. That didn't set with the refactoring evangelist in me at all. So one of the things that I have done over the last month is experiment with different ways of creating a methodology of refactoring pop-ups. And I've experimented with a lot of different things. Internal pages ain't it. You pretty much can't do internal pages in pop-ups. And when you think about what they are, it kind of makes sense, but that didn't keep me from trying it. So that didn't work. What I was doing for a few weeks was I pulled my control template back out of the box and said, okay, well, what I'll do is all the controls of my pop-up, I'll make those a control template. Then I'll go into the page, declare pop-up, drop my control template on there with all my controls. I'm done. And that didn't work too bad, but I still did have to declare the pop-up, make a few setting changes. Well, again, goes back to my harping on, it's very good exercise for you to do these webinars and so forth, because it forces you to study and learn stuff about your own code. While working on this article, I figured out that you can actually take it a step further, and you can declare a pop-up page on a control template. So my pop-up prescription pad is a pop-up page declared on a control template. As you see, this is my control template. There are no controls. All I did was create a control template and then went page, pop-up, new pop-up, and declared my prescription pad pop-up. So now this control template I can drop on any page, and by sheer magic of WX, I now have a pop-up page defined for that page. So this control template has allowed me to create a reusable pop-up that I can now drop onto any page and just use it. And we're using this for all of our validation type messages. You know, it's part of our whole tax cure theme. So we are using this pop-up on nearly every page. So that's how I've managed to reuse the pop-up instead of having to declare this on every page. So
thank goodness, Pete.
It's definitely the missing link, and Andy and I have talked a lot about it because it was the one thing that kept me from being a complete fan of pop-ups, but now I'm there. So let's look at the definition of this pop-up. All this is there are a total of 4 controls. The main control is a cell. This is our cell. Pop-ups by their nature don't have a border, don't have a background. So they show up transparent on your page. You know, that's where we get that whole gray transparent look from. I've got mine set to, I'm graying this at a higher rate than you normally would gray because I wanted our effect to be a little stronger. But notice the transparency, you know, it's not popping up a square page. That's because there is no background or anything defined for the pop-up. Now, how you get around that, if you want a square message box, is you define a cell. And that's the same thing I've done. I've defined a cell, but my cell is transparent. And the reason I did that is I'm over on the style of this cell, I have my prescription pad image defined as the background image of the cell. The reason I did that instead of using an image control is for the ability to do this by mouse movements, and apparently the one on the website is not yet. See that message box can actually be drug around. The reason for that is movable with the mouse.
Well, that's pretty good. So it's not just centered in there and
exactly
fixed.
Yes.
Wow.
And there are actually, when we look at the code, there are actually some properties where you can control where its initial position is as well. So the reason I'm using a cell instead of an image control is because it lends itself better to saying, okay, that cell controls the dragability of this whole message box. The next thing I do is I drop my close button. A regular old-fashioned close button would look ugly and kind of ruin the effect. So I decided to go with the red X Windows style close button. You may notice a lot of sites are doing these pop-up style boxes, and a lot of them are using a round X just off the corner. It seems to be becoming a standard, but you know, what can I say? I'm a standard breaker. There's only one line of code in that button, pop-up close. That's how you close the pop-up to get back to your page. And remember, this thing is running completely within browser code, so all this is happening on the browser. No calls going back and forth to the server, no screen refreshes, nothing like that. The other thing we need to make sure of is you don't want this button doing any server calls, because that would cause a page refresh. So the button itself is set up to no operation on the server. So that's closing the button. That's a static, and this is an HTML static instead of a normal static. And we'll look at the reason why I'm doing that shortly. The only
So that's
other
a scrollable static?
There it is. I don't have it defined as scrollable. My larger one I have, yeah, you could, and my larger one that you saw in the privacy policy, and we'll pop back over there real quick. I've actually got.
Hey, Pete, Bob has a question. Can I?
Yes.
Bob says, Pete, why not use page display dialog for the pop-ups and pass parameters?
Because page display is a server function, which means that your page is going to refresh back and forth. And we can actually look at that. And that exactly right there is showing you our page timed out, because I don't have any timeout management going on yet. That is a page display there. And it's very subtle, but that made a server call. This code up here changed. And when we close this, that code changes again. There has been a call back and forth to the server took place. All that context has to be managed. For validation messages, things like that, I want to stay within that browser context and stay within that session on that user. I don't want to be going back and forth with server load for all that type of stuff. So that is the reason why I'm using those pop-ups. So I'm using a combination of both. The larger one is actually a page display, and to answer your question, you see the scroll effect there, Arnold.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
I do.
Can.
I like, and you made it bigger too.
Yeah,
I mean,
this
resized that image.
Right, because we're using this one for the entire for this type of stuff. It's a bigger control. It's scrollable, and I really like the effect of how well the scroll blended into everything. I mean, they really give us the ability to do some fancy stuff here.
Clever, man, clever.
So here is all the page of our pop-up message box. There's the close issued when you click on the close button. And the other thing we've done is added a procedure to display the message. Didn't have to do this. This code could be done everywhere we want to use the pop-up, but again, we're all about refactoring, right? So I've made the message be part of the actual control template, so that anywhere I drop the control template on, I know all I got to do is issue a call to pop-up message, pass it the heading in the message, I'm done. The last three parameters are all optional parameters. And right now, I'm going to do some further playing. You'll find that there are quite a few different equates for this. You can have it position itself at the bottom left, bottom right, center, wherever the mouse happens to be, top left, top right. There are also a complete another set of those that you can actually position them based upon a control. So when you're doing validation type messages, you can actually position your pop-up directly below the control that failed validation. I'm starting to experiment with being able to pass that information into this call. The problem is, for whatever reason, at first I tried to set my parameter. I tried to pass in a parameter of the position. But when you do that, you get this, and the reason why is it says control unnamed. For whatever reason, when you try to use a variable there instead of the equate, it says, oh, you're trying to use the other version of this call where you're giving me a control name. So you can't pass in the position equate as a variable and use it for some reason. So I'm having to experiment with that a little bit and come up with good code where you can use all the features. But for right now, I'm using two different ones. Center, which will do exactly what it sounds like, center it right in the middle of the page. And the other one is setting it at an XY position. And the reason we're using that one is on our home page. Notice that is not actually centered. It is centered here and then just a little below whatever happens, below that header. We didn't want it dropping down on a big screen down into the center. We wanted to keep it up near the cure. So we're controlling that positioning a little more. So that is our pop-up pad control template. Now all we did was we came over and dropped it onto the cure control template. And when I did that, it comes in like this, because that is the size of our control template. Just resized it, make it not visible because we don't want that control template actually seen. And I threw it up in here so that when I drop this control template onto another page, that is contained within there. And as soon as I drop that control template on, we get our pop-up page. It's all there. And then, because that control template is now there, we can now make this call. Oh, that's the last thing I wanted to show you. When you drop a control template onto a page or another control template, they do their no name thing. This is one thing I wish they would make this CTPL pop-up pad, but they'll do it as no name. So the first thing you need to do when you drop that control template on there is go rename it to something that makes sense to you. And the reason for that is now when you get into your code, remember our pop-up message procedure? We have to prefix it with the control template name because that pop-up procedure lives inside that control template. So we we do control template name dot procedure name, and then there's our header, our text, and this is the cure. So we're using that actual control into position, and we're saying the X position of the R minus 100 pixels and Y at 250. And that's how we're hard coding that positioning of the pop-up. So at that point,
Sweet.
our cure is completely done. Just like we just saw how we dropped that control template on to this control template, we then drop that control template onto whatever page we want, and that entire self-contained, all those features, all that logic just magically pops onto the page and starts working. No more work than that. Real quick, I'll show you the reason that we're doing the HTML static there. We come over to
Chris Cord says, could you show that pop-up message procedure again, please?
Sure.
We didn't say please, but
and I also, guys, just so you know, I have this all written in a blog article. I will be posting at the same time Arnold posts the video. It includes a list of all the code of this, so you guys will have all of this in written format as well as the video.
Right. I'll post it right after this.
Yep. All right, so there's that procedure. The last thing I wanted to show real quick, then I have got to run to physical therapy, is on our create account page. Apparently I managed to
Yeah, but you have to have I have one question after you get to...
You never have one question. If you come to this page and try to create pete@thenextstage.com, surprisingly enough, I already have an account. Notice there are links in, that's that same pop-up that we've been issuing.
Nice.
But
I like it.
now there's a link there. And that link takes you to the login page. Well, that all happened. This is that page defined. First, we already have the cure header on this page, so I don't have to drop that pop-up message control template on here because it's already part of the cure template. I can just piggyback onto the one that's already defined. And if we look at the validate email procedure, there's our AJAX column. We're not going to have time to go into that today. Notice now, because that pop-up message is inside the cure control template, and then the pop-up pad control template within the cure template, all of that had to be prefixed to get to our procedure. But from there, because we're using an HTML static, all that is pure HTML code to put those links in. All right.
Nice.
So,
yeah. So my question.
Full cure effect.
Nice. Very good. Is there a way, all the stuff you just did, to say generate me Java or PHP, and would it work?
Well, I would assume if your project was a PHP project, I would assume all that would work because most of what we're looking at is browser code. It's actually getting converted to JavaScript already. In fact, let's go look at that real quick. If we look at the page source, and it is tough to read, but all of that, see there is our alternate text right there. So this is all JavaScript that was written based on that WX language code. So I don't think there's anything in this that would not work on a PHP site. You know, you define your site as being a PHP site to start with. Now, I think there's some confusion, misconception on the whole PHP WebDev feature. I don't think you would ever want to use WebDev as a PHP generator. That's my gut instinct. I am, you know, let me prefix that with, I'm not a PHP expert. I've never tried it, but I got a feeling a couple of things would happen. One, the code would be very ugly, as you just saw that JavaScript code. It is not generated in a developer-friendly way. It is generated in a browser-friendly way. I suspect the PHP code is the exact same story. The other thing is, as soon as you start tweaking on that PHP code outside of WebDev, you've just turned WebDev into a one-way generator. You know, you'll never be able to go back without losing your modifications. And at that point, I think there's probably better PHP generators out there if you're looking at generating a starting point and then modifying the PHP code directly. So I think
it's more what server I put it on, you know.
Right, exactly. If you're looking at using it as a PHP WebDev so that you don't have to buy the WAS server, you know, think of it that way. You know, you don't really care what the back end technology is, other than you didn't have to pay the extra for the WebDev application server because you're generating your site as PHP. So
or you could put it on a shared server.
Right. Right. So
hey, Brian has a question.
Use PHP.
Yeah, Brian says, I would like to see what type of WB project this project in the project properties. Sorry if I didn't.
Yeah, I see his message over there. This is actually defined as a dynamic web dev project. And I've done one short article on this, and we'll be expanding on it quite a bit. There is also quite a mix of AWP versus dynamic pages. The external pages of the site, like the home page, they are dynamic AWP pages. They are not the WebDev dynamic pages. Once you get...
It's your SEO thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Once you get into the login and so forth, you move over to the WebDev dynamic side of the pages. And you'll notice that page welcome has that little 1 on it. That is the first dynamic page of the site. And you can't see it because of the... Let me check everything in and you can see it. The home page
there it is.
has the little home icon. That's the home page of the site. And there are calls in here to initiate the dynamic side of the site. So it's a mix. The project is actually defined as a dynamic web dev project, but there are the external pages, we're doing AWP for several reasons, SEO being the key one. But the other reason is I don't want to take that performance hit of starting up a session and so forth on my external marketing pages. There's no reason for it, no need for it. I want to maximize those for SEO. I want them to serve up fast. Once you're ready to create an account, log in, I'll transfer you over to the dynamic web dev side of the site. I don't want to go through all the work of having the whole site be in AWP pages and managing all that context. I don't have a need to do that because this isn't a eBay, Amazon type of site where I need, once you're logged in and into your account, obviously all that stuff, I don't have anything over there that needs to be exposed to the search engines or to be linked externally. So there's no reason for me to need any of that stuff exposed. So why take on all that session management work if I don't have to? At the cost of cloud servers, I'll throw a couple $100 extra a month at the cloud servers instead of spending that extra work and development time.
There you go. Hey, you better get over to your therapy.
That I better do. So again,
Yeah.
I'm
Hey,
going to
thank
click
you.
post on the article. Arnold's going to post the video and the
Yep.
PDF of the code. So,
And some attachments.
yep. So you guys got plenty of stuff to play with.
And if you guys want more of Pete, we can bring him on. We have some ideas, don't we, Pete?
That we do.
Okay, guys. Big claps for you, man. Good job.
I think everyone's still asleep.
Oh, Andy will talk to you. Okay. So thanks again, and this is fascinating. And like you said, you know, between you and Glenn and whomever, you know, this web dev stuff is going to be exciting. I like this.
Yeah.
I like that hybrid that you have. I think that's a great deal.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I really encourage you guys that, you know, I've heard a few of you make comments that, well, I'm not far enough along in my development to do a webinar. I really encourage you to do it. I mean, it's you know things we don't know, you know, because you're working on different style projects, and it truly does help you. You know, it forces you to do those code reviews and stuff that we get lazy about and don't do. It's a good exercise for everyone.
Exactly.
That's how Pete does his unit testing.
Exactly. Unit testing while you work.
That's right.
No. Fantastic. Thanks for the big effort, man.
All right, guys. I have got to get out the door, so everyone behave.
Out the door you go.
Okay, I'm going to
I'll be back on in a couple hours if anyone has any questions.
Be good or be good at it.
Stopping the recording. Yo.